Now that we understand the numerical pattern of the golden ratio, we can now go on to discover how it can be applied to something that we can visualize. The grid you see here is a representation of the Fibonacci sequence applied visually. If we draw our attention firstly to the innermost squares, you'll see that two of them are denoted with the number 1. As you recall, in the Fibonacci sequence, the first two numbers are 1s. So we have one square of the grid and we have a copy, which is the sum of that square, neighbouring it. So both squares being 1 in value, or 1 by 1, occupy one square of the grid. Next, we see a larger square denoted by a 2. This, of course, is the next number in the Fibonacci sequence, since it's the sum of the previous two 1s. This square is 2 by 2. 2 squares in width, 2 squares in height, occupying a total of 4 squares. The next square to the left is denoted by the number 3, which is the sum of the previous two numbers 1 and 2. It's 3 squares in height, 3 squares in width, covering a total of 9 squares. Beneath that we have number 5 depicted by 5 by 5 squares, occupying a total of 25 squares. So you'll see this visual pattern continue for 8, 13 and 21 also. Collectively, these are commonly known as the golden ratio squares. We could of course extend the grid further, but that's ultimately needless, since all that truly matters are the proportions of one to the next. The grid is potentially infinite. Technically the numbers, or the number of squares, don't even matter. Again, these are just used for the purpose of proportion. Use of this grid simply gives us a pool of proportions to work with as designers. Most importantly, the ratio for these proportions is 1.618. This is the magic number of the golden ratio. The composition of the squares and beyond essentially shows the Fibonacci sequence in visual form. Here we have the same arrangement of squares which we had previously. You'll see now, however, that the grid is missing because we no longer need the grid squares for educational reference. Now you'll see that an outline of a quarter circle curve has been placed inside of each square. With each curve matched up perfectly against the two corners of each square, these two are now perfectly proportional in accordance with the golden ratio. And together they form a spiral known as the golden spiral. These curves, or the spiral as a whole, can be utilized to develop compositions in graphic design. The same applies to the squares too, and the formation of the 9 squares as a whole. Provided that they perfectly touch the corners and or the boundary of each square in the same manner, literally any shape can be developed within this model to compose graphic elements with proportions in accordance with the golden ratio. The following method is the easiest way to develop the entire golden ratio grid in one fell swoop. And it starts with a square. So selecting the rectangle tool, I'm going to draw out a square, holding shift to keep proportions. I'm going to go to transform, and with constraint selected, I'm going to ensure that this has a width and a reflective height of 100 millimeters, like so. Next, I'm going to select the ellipse tool to draw out a circle, holding shift to keep proportions. I'm going to go to the transform panel with constraints on. Once again, I'm going to set this at 100 millimeters for the width and the reflective height. Again, I'm going to draw another circle. I'm going to go to the transform panel once again, and with constraints on, I'm going to set this to 200 width and 200 height. Now I'm going to select this circle and the square. I'm going to go to the Align panel, and beneath Align Objects I'm going to click Horizontal Align Center and then Vertical Align Center. Now this places the circle inside the square, as you'll see. Ensuring that Smart Guides is switched on, I'm going to take this circle and I'm going to place its center upon the bottom right hand corner of the square, and you'll see intersect appears together with the pink lines. This denotes the center. And so I let go of the mouse button, and next I'm going to select the square and the circle together. I'm going to go to the Pathfinder panel and I'm going to click Divide, like so. Now with the Direct Selection tool, I'm going to rid of the excess of the circle. Now we're left with this, and it's this which we're going to use as the basis to build the golden ratio grid. Now ensuring that everything is grouped by going to Object Group, I'm now going to right click and I'm going to go to Transform Scale. Now I'm going to type in 100% and I'm going to type in the divide symbol, and then I'm going to type in the golden ratio number, which is 1.618. Now I'm going to click Copy. So now you'll see I have a copy of this. So I'm going to drag this to the right. I'm going to move my cursor to the top right until I have those arrows appear. I'm going to hold Shift just to lock it down on the 45 degree, and you'll see I can flip it like so. Now with Smart Guide still switched on, I can move this to the left until the pink line appears. And I see the intersect there. So again, I'm going to right click upon this. I'm going to go to Transform Scale. Do exactly the same again, 100% divided by 1.618, and I'm going to click Copy. So here we have the copy of that. Again, I'm going to rotate it holding Shift, and I'm going to place it up above so that the corner and the edge meets flush with the square above. So having zoomed in, we're now going to do the same again, selecting this, right clicking Transform and going to Scale. 100% divided by 1.618 and clicking upon Copy. So there we have our new element, which we can rotate once again, holding Shift and dragging it down into position so that the intersect appears down here and here to show that it's flush. Once again, we repeat that step, Transform Scale, 100% divided by 1.618, and we copy, rotate the shape holding Shift, dragging that into position till we see the intersect, and we repeat again, Transform Scale, and clicking upon Copy, rotating, placing in position, and we do the same again. We could stop here, but let's go a little bit further. Right click, Transform Scale, 100% divided by 1.618, and clicking upon Copy, rotate, and placing in position. So there we have the golden ratio grid complete. We have the golden ratio squares, we have the golden ratio circles, and we have the golden spiral. As you've seen, not only is the golden ratio about squares, curves, and a spiral, they are also rectangles to consider. So let's take a quick look at the visual rectangles by referring to the golden ratio grid of squares. In the grid of squares that we developed, the golden rectangles can be seen in the following places. Of course, these aren't the only golden rectangles, since there's an infinite number in accordance with a mathematical rule. Like every other shape which is a product of the golden ratio, the golden rectangle adheres to the ratio 1.618. In simple terms, this means that the golden ratio rectangle has a length that is slightly more then 1.5 times its width. So with this information, we can develop a golden ratio rectangle without even using the grid. We know that a rectangle that is 100 units in width will be 161 units in height, whether those units are millimeters, centimeters, or pixels. So having learned where the rectangles are in the golden ratio grid, we can go ahead and introduce those so that we can use them in our projects by simply copying them out. So I'm going to select the rectangle tool, and with a stroke of red to differentiate, I'm going to click the top left hand corner of the first and largest rectangle, dragging down the shape like so. Now, we can use outline mode for this purpose if we wish by going to view outline, and it gives us this result. It shows us the actual path of each shape. This is for preciseness. Now you can enter this mode after you've drawn all your shapes and make the necessary adjustments, or you can just simply draw the shapes in outline mode. Now you'll see, for the benefit of teaching, I'm actually going to go back into what's called GPU preview. That's the non-outline mode, just so you can see the colours of the rectangles as I'm drawing them. So onto the next, clicking top left hand corner and dragging down, matching the lines as close as possible. Like I say, we can make perfect adjustments later in outline mode. Onto the next, like so. Moving on to the next, and the next, and finally the last. So that's all the primary shapes in place. We have golden circles, we have golden squares, golden rectangles, and we have the golden spiral.